Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm here again with a brand new story. Enjoy the story, and don't forget to share your valuable thoughts in the comments.
What I'm about to tell you sounds like fiction, but it isn't. At least, that's what the official reports say. And yet, when you reach the end of this story, you'll understand why so many people still don't believe the official version at all. Because sometimes, the scariest mysteries are not the ones with monsters or ghosts, but the ones that happened in broad daylight, with real people, real evidence, and still no explanation. This is the story of a disappearance in the American desert that should have been impossible. It began on a warm October evening in 2011, somewhere along the long, empty stretch of US Route 50 in Nevada, often called the loneliest road in America. A road so isolated that drivers can go miles without seeing another car, another light, or even a building. That night, a man named Daniel Mercer was driving eastbound. Daniel was not a thrill seeker. He was not reckless. He was a 38-year-old data analyst from Sacramento, California. Organized, routine-driven, and careful to the point of obsession. He had made this same trip dozens of times before. Sacramento to Salt Lake City, a business route he could almost drive blindfolded. He even had the habit of calling his wife every 2 hours, like clockwork. That night, his last call was 9:14 p.m. He told her something simple. Almost halfway through Nevada, everything's normal, a bit windy tonight. She laughed and told him to be safe. Then the call ended, and that was the last time anyone ever heard Daniel Mercer's voice again. At first, nothing seemed unusual. No crash reports, no distress calls, no cell phone pings indicating emergency, just silence. But silence in the desert is not empty, it is suspicious. Because even in 2011, even in the middle of nowhere, something should have shown up. A signal, a trace, a scrap of movement. But there was nothing. His wife reported him missing the next morning when he didn't arrive in Salt Lake City. Authorities assumed the simplest explanation: car accident. The Nevada Highway Patrol began scanning Route 50. They checked ravines, cliffs, and abandoned stretches of road where vehicles often went off unnoticed. But Daniel's car was not there. No skid marks, no broken glass, no tire tracks leading off-road. It was as if he had simply driven into the desert and disappeared from reality. 3 days later, something strange happened. A truck driver reported seeing Daniel's silver sedan, but not where it should have been. He claimed it was parked neatly on the shoulder of an abandoned dirt road, about 12 miles off Route 50. Doors closed, lights off, no sign of struggle. At first, investigators thought this was the break they needed. They rushed to the location, but when they arrived, the car was gone again. Not moved, not towed, gone. That's when the case stopped being routine and started becoming something else, something nobody in the sheriff's department wanted to put in writing. A week later, the car was found. Not on a road, not near civilization, but deep inside the desert basin, known locally as Hollow Ridge, a place so remote it doesn't even appear clearly on some maps. The vehicle was intact, locked, windows rolled up, keys still inside, but Daniel Mercer was not there. And inside the car was something that made the investigators pause: a notebook. The notebook contained Daniel's travel logs. Nothing unusual at first. Fuel stops, mileage, weather notes. But on the last page, written in uneven handwriting, was a single line: If I stop responding, it is because the road is no longer the same road. That sentence changed everything. At first, detectives assumed stress, confusion, maybe even mental breakdown. But Daniel had no history of psychological issues, no drugs in his system, no financial troubles, no enemies. He was by all accounts the most ordinary missing person imaginable, which made the case even more disturbing. Because ordinary people don't leave messages like that, not unless something happened to make them believe it. Then came the second clue. A security camera located at a remote gas station 40 miles west of where the car was found captured footage at 9:47 p.m. The footage showed Daniel's car pulling in. Daniel gets out, buys water, talks briefly to the cashier. Everything normal. But then something strange happens. At 9:53 p.m., Daniel exits the store. He walks towards his car, and then he stops, just freezes, staring down the road. For 18 seconds, he does not move. The cashier later described it as he looked like he was seeing something that wasn't supposed to be there. Then Daniel got into his car and drove away. What he saw was never recorded. As investigators dug deeper, they began to interview other drivers who had been on Route 50 that night, and slowly a pattern emerged. 3 separate drivers reported something similar. A section of road where the landscape looked wrong. One driver said the mountains looked closer than they should be. Another driver said the road appeared longer than it was on the map. And one trucker claimed his GPS briefly showed him driving off the Earth grid entirely. Every witness described the same thing in different words. Reality didn't feel stable.
Authorities dismissed it as fatigue, optical illusion, or faulty electronics. But then came the most disturbing testimony. A woman named Carla Jennings, driving eastbound that same night, reported seeing Daniel's car again. But this time, it was not parked. It was moving slowly behind her. No headlights, no sound, just following. She said she tried to speed up, but when she checked her mirror again, the road behind her was empty, except for something she could not explain. A gap, a section of darkness in the road where her headlights simply stopped working. After that report, the investigation took a strange turn. A small team from a Federal Transportation Research Unit was quietly brought in. Officially, they were checking GPS interference. Unofficially, they were testing something else, because similar reports had been increasing along certain isolated desert highways across Nevada and Utah. Vehicles briefly vanishing from tracking systems, drivers reporting time distortions, road segments appearing in different positions depending on direction of travel. But nothing was ever proven, nothing ever confirmed, until Daniel Mercer. Months passed. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A geology student from the University of Nevada claimed he found unusual electromagnetic anomalies in the Hollow Ridge area. He recorded sudden magnetic spikes, strong enough to disrupt navigation systems. But what was more disturbing was the pattern. The spikes were not random. They formed a repeating structure, almost like a pulse, like something breathing beneath the ground. When investigators returned to Hollow Ridge with proper equipment, they found something even stranger. A section of desert where compasses failed completely, where radio signals dropped without warning, where even drone footage became distorted, with frames skipping or repeating. And at the center of it all, a 200-meter stretch of land that did not behave like the surrounding environment. cars passing through that zone reported momentary confusion, engines stalling, sudden silence in communication devices, and one report from a patrol officer said, "For about 10 seconds, it felt like I was driving somewhere else entirely." Then came the final discovery. A second notebook page was found wedged beneath the passenger seat of Daniel's abandoned car. It had not been there during the initial investigation. No explanation for how it appeared. The handwriting was identical, but the message was different. "The road is not moving. We are." That single sentence changed the direction of the entire case again, because now investigators were no longer asking, "Where did Daniel go?" They were asking something far disturbing. What if he hadn't gone anywhere at all? What if the environment itself had shifted around him? Years later, the case remains officially unsolved. No body, no confirmed accident, no evidence of foul play, just fragments of strange data, conflicting witness reports, and one abandoned vehicle that refuses to explain itself. But locals along Route 50 still tell stories. Truckers still avoid certain stretches at night. GPS devices still occasionally glitch in the same region. And every once in a while, someone reports seeing a silver sedan parked far off the road, engine cold, lights off, as if waiting for something. And if you ever drive through Nevada's desert at night, and your navigation suddenly goes silent, and the road ahead feels just slightly longer than it should, don't ignore it. Because according to one final anonymous report filed years after the investigation closed, some roads don't disappear. They just stop leading where they used to. And Daniel Mercer, he was never found. But his last recorded GPS signal, frozen for 6 milliseconds before cutting out completely, still exists in the database. The coordinates point to a place that on every map is simply empty desert. But according to the data, something was definitely there for just a moment, and then it wasn't. And that is where the story ends, at least officially. But in mysteries like this, official is rarely the same as final.
You think the Nevada desert case was strange? What if I told you there's another one, older, quieter, and even harder to explain? Because this time it didn't happen on a lonely highway. It happened inside a city that never sleeps. A place filled with cameras, witnesses, and light everywhere. And still, nobody saw what really happened. This story begins in Chicago, Illinois, in the winter of 1994. A time before smartphones, before GPS tracking, before everything we take for granted today. Back then, if someone disappeared, the world didn't immediately know. And that made it easier for things to vanish without a trace. But not like this. Never like this. Her name was Elena Marquez, a 29-year-old architecture student at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Bright, disciplined, focused. She was working on a final thesis project that involved mapping structural weaknesses in older Chicago buildings. Her professors described her as obsessively precise. Friends described her as someone who notices details others don't even see. And that detail, her ability to notice patterns, would later become the most important part of this mystery. On January 12, 1994, Elena left her apartment at exactly 6:41 p.m. There was nothing unusual about that day. She attended classes, met a friend for coffee, and returned home briefly to grab her notes. Then she left again. Her destination was a public library archive located in downtown Chicago, near the Loop. She was researching old city blueprints. It was supposed to be a normal study session. She told her roommate she'd be back by midnight. She never returned. At first, no one panicked. Elena was responsible, reliable, the kind of person who didn't just disappear. But when she missed 2 phone calls and didn't show up for class the next morning, concern began to grow. By noon, her roommate contacted police, and that's when things started getting strange. The first confusion came from surveillance footage. Investigators pulled security tapes from the street near her apartment. At 6:41 p.m., Elena is clearly seen walking out. She is carrying a black shoulder bag. She turns left onto the sidewalk. Then she disappears behind a parked bus. And that is where the problem begins, because when the bus drives away, Elena is no longer on the sidewalk. No walking away, no turning corner, no entering another street. Just gone. At first, police assumed camera error, tape malfunction, blind spot. Chicago in the 90s had plenty of outdated surveillance systems. But then they checked the next camera down the street. Different angle, different building, different system entirely. It showed the same thing. Elena walking, bus passing, empty sidewalk, no exit point. The case became official within 48 hours. Missing person, possible abduction. But there was no sign of struggle, no witness report, no vehicle connected. Nothing. It was as if she had been removed from the frame of reality itself. Then came the second discovery. Elena's bag was found 3 days later, not far from the Chicago River. Dry, untouched, no fingerprints except her own. Inside were her notes, her laptop, a bulky early model, and a folded sheet of paper. On that paper was a diagram, not a building blueprint, something else, a repeated pattern of intersecting lines forming a grid-like structure. And in the center of the diagram, she had written a single sentence. The city does not repeat itself unless something forces it to. Investigators had no idea what it meant. Neither did her professors. But one structural engineering expert at the university noticed something unusual. The diagram wasn't random. It resembled mapping data. Specifically, it looked like Elena was tracking irregularities in building alignment across Chicago. Not damage, not collapse risk, but something more subtle. Misalignment in spatial structure. Almost like sections of the city didn't perfectly match themselves from one block to the next. At first, this sounded like academic overthinking, but then something happened that made the case impossible to ignore. A construction worker came forward. He had been working near the downtown subway expansion project. He reported something unusual on the night Elena disappeared. At approximately 7:10 p.m., he said his crew noticed something strange, a street that looked slightly shifted. He described it like this: "We were looking at the same block, but the buildings didn't line up the way they should have. At first, they thought it was fog distortion, but then a second worker confirmed the same thing. Even worse, their measuring equipment briefly malfunctioned. Distances were off by a few feet, then corrected themselves moments later."
Authorities dismissed it as environmental conditions, cold weather, light reflection, human error. But the construction crew insisted on one thing. The city looked wrong that night. Just for a short time, and then it went back to normal. The investigation stalled for weeks. No suspects, no leads, no body. Just silence. Until something unexpected happened. On February 3rd, 1994, Elena's university office was found unlocked. No signs of forced entry. Her desk was untouched, But inside her drawer, investigators found something that had not been there before. A second diagram, different from the first, more detailed, more precise, and this time it had coordinates marked across sections of Chicago. When plotted, they formed a pattern that overlapped with subway tunnels, underground utility lines, and old infrastructure no longer in use. But the most disturbing part, the pattern was incomplete, as if it was still being drawn. A mathematician from Northwestern University was brought in. He studied the diagrams for weeks. Then he made a claim that was never officially published in the case file. He said, "This is not mapping the city. It is mapping behavior of space inside the city." No one understood what that meant, except Elena. Then came the third and final confirmed sighting. A security guard working night shift in a downtown parking structure reported seeing Elena at 8:03 p.m. on the night she disappeared. He said she was standing alone near a stairwell exit, not running, not panicked, just staring at the wall. When he asked if she needed help, she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reportedly said, "It's worse when it aligns." Then she walked down the stairs and was never seen again. That stairwell was searched extensively. No hidden rooms, no exits, no tunnels, just concrete. But something unusual was found. A faint electromagnetic fluctuation recorded near the lower level. Weak, inconsistent, but present. Years passed. The case slowly faded into archives, but it never fully disappeared, because every few years something strange would happen in Chicago. A construction anomaly, a brief GPS error, a building blueprint that didn't quite match physical reality. Always small, always dismissed, but always in the same general region. Then, in 2008, a graduate research team revisited the case using modern mapping technology. What they discovered reignited everything. When they overlaid Elena's original diagrams with updated satellite data, they matched. Not perfectly, but close enough to raise serious questions. It suggested that certain sections of Chicago were not static. They shifted slightly over time, not physically visible to humans, but measurable in data. And then came the most disturbing hypothesis. One researcher proposed, what if Elena didn't disappear? What if she simply followed the pattern too far, too deep into something embedded in the structure of the city itself? Something that only becomes visible when you know how to look for it. No one has ever confirmed that theory, and no official agency recognizes it. But her case file still exists, still open, still marked unresolved. And sometimes, late at night in Chicago archives, researchers report something strange. Files that briefly appear duplicated, maps that show slight misalignment, and in very rare cases, a name written twice in the same database entry, Elena Marquez, followed by coordinates that don't match any known location in the city. Because some mysteries don't end with answers, they just shift out of place, quietly, indistinguishably, until you're no longer sure what part of the story was real to begin with. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not that she disappeared, but that the city didn't even notice the moment it happened.
You want another one? All right.
But this one is different, because it doesn't involve a desert, it doesn't involve a city, it doesn't even involve a disappearance that anyone immediately noticed. It involves something far more unsettling, a place where people kept arriving, even though no one remembered sending them there. This story begins in 2003 in rural Japan, in a small coastal town called Minakami Bay. A quiet place, fishing boats in the morning, fog rolling in at night. The kind of town where nothing unusual is supposed to happen. But that assumption turned out to be wrong, very wrong. It started with a train, not a crash, not an accident. A train that arrived on time, but at the wrong station. On March 9th, 2003, train 227 departed from Tokyo Station, heading toward Niigata. A routine intercity route, hundreds of passengers, business travelers, students, tourists, everything normal. The train left at 7:32 a.m., and according to all official systems, it should have arrived in Niigata at 10:41 a.m. But it didn't. At 10:41 a.m., train 227 was recorded as in transit. At 11:10 a.m., still in transit. At 12:45 a.m., the tracking system froze, then reset, then displayed something impossible. Final location, Minakami Bay Station. A station that, according to official railway maps, did not exist. At first, railway officials assumed a system error. Japan's rail system is one of the most advanced in the world, but even advanced systems fail. So they checked manually. They contacted stations along the route. No one had seen train 227 pass through. No delays reported, no emergency signals, no communication from the conductor. It was as if the train had simply left the network. But then came the first eyewitness report. A fisherman named Hiroshi Tanaka was out at sea that morning. At around 10:50 a.m., he reported seeing something unusual along the coastline. A train, moving slowly, not on tracks, but parallel to the shore, near an abandoned coastal stretch where old railway lines had once existed decades ago. He described it like this: it looked like it was following a track that no longer exists. That statement made no sense at the time, but it would become important later. By 1 p.m., authorities launched a full search. Helicopters scanned the coastline. Rail teams inspected every segment of the route. Nothing. No wreckage, no derailment, no signal. Just absence. Then, at 3:18 p.m., something happened that changed everything. A coastal maintenance worker reported seeing passengers, not inside a train, but walking along an abandoned railway path near Minakami Bay. He said he looked confused, disoriented, as if they had just arrived somewhere unfamiliar. He called it in immediately, but by the time police arrived, no one was there, except for footprints, hundreds of them, leading from the shoreline into the fog, and then stopping abruptly. No return path, no continuation, just stopping. That night, train 227 was officially declared missing. Entire train, all passengers, all crew, gone. But this is where the story stops being simple, because over the next few weeks, something strange began happening across Japan. People started appearing, not missing persons returning, but strangers, waking up in train stations, on benches, inside waiting rooms, always disoriented, always confused, and always reporting the same thing. They had been on train 227. But here's the problem. Their identities did not match passenger records. Some had names that did not appear on the original manifest. Others had memories of boarding stations that Train 227 never stopped at. A few even described conversations with people that were not on the official list of passengers. Investigators tried to reconstruct everything. They rebuilt timelines, they checked ticket logs, they examined CCTV footage from every station along the route. And that's when they found something even more disturbing. At 9:58 a.m., somewhere between Tokyo and Niigata, Train 227 briefly appeared on a camera feed from an unmanned rural crossing. But the footage was corrupted, frames repeated, time jumped, and for exactly 6 seconds, the train appeared to be moving through a section of track that was overgrown and officially decommissioned in 1986.
When engineers checked that location, they found something impossible. The old tracks still existed, but they were buried beneath newer construction. And yet, satellite scans showed a faint alignment, almost like the train had found a path through infrastructure that shouldn't have been accessible anymore. Then came the most controversial discovery. A railway technician analyzing the data noticed something odd. The GPS logs from Train 227 did not show a clean route. Instead, they showed small deviations, tiny shifts in position. Not random, but patterned, like the train was adjusting itself to something invisible. A physics professor from Kyoto University was brought in. He studied the anomaly for weeks, and then he made a statement that was never officially included in the public report. He said, "It is not that the train disappeared. It is that the route it followed no longer exists in our version of reality." That phrase caused immediate backlash. Officials dismissed it. Railway authorities labeled it speculation. But internally, the investigation continued, quietly. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. A recovered passenger. A woman named Aiko Matsuda appeared at a rural bus stop 17 days after the incident, alive, unharmed, but deeply confused. Her testimony changed everything. She described boarding Train 227 normally, reading a book, watching scenery pass, then noticing something strange around 10:40 a.m. She said the train entered a fog bank, but the fog did not behave normally. It didn't clear, it thickened, and then the windows stopped reflecting light properly. She described it like this: "It felt like the outside stopped matching the inside." Then she remembered hearing a loud metallic sound, not an impact, more like something bending. Then silence, absolute silence. No engine noise, no movement, just stillness. When she looked around, the other passengers were gone. Not vanished suddenly, but no longer present. Seats empty, luggage still there, but people gone. And then she said something that investigators initially dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. The train wasn't on a track anymore. It was on something else. She said the doors opened, but outside was not a station, not a landscape, not even darkness, just a space she couldn't describe. And she walked out. She didn't know how long she walked, but eventually she found herself at a bus stop near Minakami Bay. When investigators checked her claims, they found something unsettling. Her description of the fog matched the coastal fisherman's sighting.
Her timeline aligned with the corrupted CCTV footage, and her psychological evaluation showed no signs of fabrication. But there was one final detail that no one could explain. Aiko Matsuda had a train ticket dated March 9, 2003, stamped valid, but the destination printed on it was not Niigata. It read Minakami Bay Station, a station that still, officially, does not exist. Years later, railway companies quietly revised certain internal safety protocols. Old coastal routes were resurveyed, decommissioned tracks were inspected again, and every now and then, engineers report something odd. A brief signal glitch, a missing coordinate, a railway route that appears on internal systems for a fraction of a second, and then disappears. Train 227 was never found. The remaining passengers were never accounted for. The official explanation remains system anomaly, unresolved tracking failure. But unofficially, among railway workers, a different theory still circulates, one that is never written down, only spoken quietly in maintenance rooms at night. They say some routes are not destroyed, some routes are not abandoned. They are simply no longer connected to where we are. And sometimes, rarely, something manages to find its way onto them anyway. And if that happens, it doesn't always come back on the same map.